right, let's jump on in. Let's go with the Jacksonville Jaguars. I figure why not start with the divisional winners last year? They were 9-8. Vegas has them at 9.5. I think that's a good number. I would take the over on it because, again, I don't think the rest of the division has improved enough to move the needle in terms of fighting for that. In fact, Titans are the only ones that I could see being a race for the divisional title. But that being said, go ahead.
Can I jump in really quick? With you had two teams last year with the Colts and the Texans that were sub 4 win teams. Even if they get another 2 wins, if one of those are in the division, I mean, I can see the Jags taking. A lot of people are saying the Jags are going to run away with this division. I think this division's got a lot more competitive.
I'm not saying they're running it away with the division.
They're the best team in the division, but
yeah, they are. They should win it, but I think the Titans have a chance. But we'll get to the Titans at the end of this episode here. But Jaguars, they scored 100 more points last year as a team than anybody else in their division. So I mean, that just goes to show the caliber of the team they are. They were 12th in passing yards in the NFL, 9th in passing attempts in the NFL. The number that was a little bit different for me that I think they can improve upon this year was their rushing, if they really want to break themselves into a top AFC contender. And they were 16th in rushing attempts and 14th in yards. So obviously they were only top 10 in passing attempts. They weren't top 10 in any other category. I believe that's going to change this year. They were 11th in the NFL in total touchdowns. So this team scored often, which is what you want when you want a piece of a fantasy team, or on your fantasy, you want a piece of a team. And that's what we're going to go over here. You've got Trevor Lawrence, ADP 54th overall. He was QB8. He went for 4,100 yards, 25 touchdowns. He had another 291 on the ground and 5 touchdowns rushing. The biggest thing that he went from his rookie year to here, besides changing of the coaching staff, which was, I think, the most important thing for him, was he had a 6% increase in completion percentage. And that was just a world of difference for him and that team. Now, it probably helped getting people like Christian Kirk. It helped getting someone like Marvin Jones and Zay Jones playing well. And then obviously getting Travis Etienne out the backfield does that to you as well. But as QB8's right around where I have him as my QB in terms of rankings, like 8, 9, 10, that range. So where he's going, where people are drafting him, is right about where he is. Now, somebody who I think on this team is the running back position. Where do you rank Travis Etienne, a guy who finished RB16 last year with 1,100 yards and 5 touchdowns and another 316 through the air?
Well, I think that, going into the season, coming out of last season, I was really hopeful. I'm like, all right, well, he can really take over this backfield. He's really going to have control. And then they go and draft Tank Bigsby. And now I'm not too sure on, listen, I still like him. I think he's going to be, a high-end RB2 in terms of fantasy production. You had Doug Peterson come out today, or not today, a couple of days ago, and say that he wants to run Etienne. He thinks Etienne can be a 1,700, 1,800 rushing yards guy. And he could. But unless he's getting in the end zone, if he gets stopped anywhere in the red zone, Tank Bigsby is probably going to end up taking some goal line work from him. I think Bigsby is going to cut into Etienne's workload at least the second half of the season. Not off the start, but Etienne has a couple issues. All right, he wasn't very efficient in the red zone, and he fumbles. And those are my big two concerns on him, because in those two scenarios, there's going to be short yardage work. So he's going to lose a lot of short yard rushes. He's going to lose goal line work, and if his touchdown numbers aren't great, 1,300 yards is still good. Right? Like, I like him in that range with like Pollard, Aaron Jones. Like, I like him in the, I would go and draft him in the second round. Breece Hall is another guy. There's a ton of people I would take him over. I'm gonna really stay consistent with this. I'm gonna still say I would rather have I'd rather have Etienne over Bijan. And that's just based on this offense that we know what this offense is. This offense we expect to be better. And so, yeah, I like Etienne in the second round. And if he falls to the end of the second round, someone's going to get a steal there at an RB2 position.
Well, yeah, 31 overall. He's falling to the end of that second round. In a lot of mock drafts that I've done, he's fallen to the turn, which is, pretty huge for somebody. If you think about one of those first 3 to 5 teams grabbing, your Jefferson, your Jamar Chase, your Cup, or your Hill, or any of those, to get someone like ETN as your RB1, you're going to have the opportunities. I think the biggest thing to me, the one number, and you said it, you hit the nail on the head with the running back red zone efficiency. He was 9th overall in red zone touches, which is huge for you as a running back. But when you bring in a guy like Tank Bigsby, who's got the size that can plug the ball into the end zone, ETN, isn't the biggest running back either. He wasn't playing like your smaller backs, like your, back in the day, your Warwick Dunn or current time Austin Eckler, where every time they got the ball in the red zone, there was a good chance they were making it in the end zone there. So you may see, I could see some situation here where I don't think the touches are going to be 50-50. I don't think they'll even be 60-40, but you're going to have a thunder and lightning situation here that you saw with the Giants when Jacobs was young, when you saw with Allstott when he came to Tampa Bay with Warwick Dunn, like situation like that, where when they need the tough yards, it's going to probably go to Bigsby unless they're going to go through the air, and then ETN's your guy, because he only had 3 drops on the season and his target percentage was pretty high as well. So I like ETN. I'd love him his yards per reception was number 5 amongst running backs. It was at 9 yards per reception.
Really
so it was very efficient. To me, I like him. I think I love him as an RB2, as my second RB off the board, especially, but I'd be happy with him as my first running back off the board too. I also am targeting Tank Bigsby because that's a guy who can, I'm not talking 17 touchdowns like Jamal Williams, but you could have a guy that all of a sudden shows up and he's got 6 touchdowns on the ground. Like you're looking at an AJ Dillon, Aaron Jones situation here. I think is what probably a good comp with a little less touches.
Keeper leagues, dynasty leagues, go and grab Tank Bigsby. And again, if anything happens to ETN, he's going to be a guy there, and he can take a majority of the workload. When I said earlier that he's going to cut into the workload, again, I didn't mean like a 50-50 split, even a 60-40 split, but for him, he's going to take a lot of the significant carries, not just end game run the clock out. He's going to take significant carries away. And unless ETN just comes out of nowhere and super efficient, but we also saw how quick they were to kind of move off of James Robinson. And James Robinson in the first 3 games was pretty effective for the Jaguars last year. And then all of a sudden it was just like, yeah, we got someone younger and someone better. And Robinson's what, 26, 27? So he's not old.
Well, but he also just got signed by the Patriots and then released by the Patriots, and then the Giants have him. I wouldn't be surprised if he doesn't make the Giants roster. So something's going on with James Robinson, period, too, as well.
Yeah, I get it, but having that quick turnover where it's just moving from one efficient guy to the next, it's like, I don't think teams are afraid to do this at the running back position anymore, especially guys that they're not drafting high end. In the top 10 picks, or in the first round, teams aren't required to pay these guys a lot of money. So for them to move on to someone who might help their team better, again, ETN is going to be a high-end RB2 this year. I can make the argument for him getting into the RB1 situation. I think he's going to be one of those borderline, like I think he can finish RB10 overall, but I also think he can finish RB18 overall. So he's kind of in that mid-range.
I think RB16 is where he finished last year. He only had 5 total touchdowns, and he had 1,400 total yards. I could see him ending up with 1,500 total yards, but for him to get into the top 10, he's going to need to have 10 total touchdowns. And I think that's the part that's going to be difficult with all the weapons that we're about to get into on the receiving game on top of that. So going into the wide receiver, and by the way, Travis Etienne also was a first-round pick versus Tank Bigsby being a third-round pick. So obviously the team is invested in Etienne and they like him. New coaching staff and everything like that, but they're invested in him financially as well. But as we know with the running backs, that doesn't mean much because everybody's treating them like a dime a dozen. So going to the wide receivers, this is one wide receiver room that has been a carousel over the past couple of years, and it continues going from last year to this year. We lose Marvin Jones Jr. and we gain Calvin Ridley. So Calvin Ridley comes in, and he's your pseudo wide receiver one, even though Christian Kirk was the wide receiver one last year. Calvin Ridley's going 43rd overall as your wide receiver 17 off the board for a guy who hasn't played in pretty much 2 years. Christian Kirk out of the slot is going 69 overall, wide receiver 26 for a guy who finished as wide receiver 11 in fantasy last year. And let's not forget Zay Jones. Which of these three do you find as the best value?
I mean, I think I'm not going to talk about Zay Jones. I mean, I know he's efficient in his numbers, and you can get him for pretty cheap. But
I mean, pretty much free,
I
to be
want
honest with you.
Yeah, I want Calvin Ridley or Christian Kirk. And I think both their values are really good compared to other guys around where they're being drafted. I mean, you're looking Calvin Ridley, what you said, 43rd overall. So, fourth round, end of fourth round, middle fourth round. And then you're looking at Christian Kirk with 69th overall. So you're looking sixth round, seventh round value on those guys. I think that's really good value for what you're going to get there. I like Christian Kirk's value a little bit more. I think he is, they use him kind of at every position. He gets the majority of his work out of the slot. We've talked about this before. I think he's the best slot receiver in the game in terms of what they can do with him and what he ends up producing out of the position. Having Calvin Ridley on the other side, where people overreact to workout videos. It's so much different when you get into pads, but Calvin Ridley's a really, really, really good route runner. And I know people are making the argument that Ridley is, the only time he's really had productive numbers was when he was hyper targeted. And it's like, no, he had Julio on the other side and he still commanded over 100 targets. Like he's a good receiver. And I think people forget that because he's missed some time away from football. And I think that's the biggest thing to keep an eye on is like, he's young enough where I don't think that's going to be significant, but like we saw Josh Gordon step away when he was young and then come back and not be as efficient and not be as productive as he was. And so I don't know if the best years are behind Calvin Ridley, but he's stepping into an offense where, again, like he's just a piece of the puzzle. He's not being, they're not asking him to come out and be this guy that he's not. Like they're going to go and ask him to be part of the wide receiver room, not be the one guy that's come in there and going to make a huge change and huge difference. I like this offense enough, and especially in the passing game, that I wouldn't mind either having either one of these guys on my team. If you miss out on Calvin Ridley, go and get Christian Kirk. Like you're going to want a piece of this passing offense. And if you miss out on those guys, Evan Ingram is a really good option too.
Well, and obviously ADP is changing every single day. In fact, I just updated the numbers. Calvin Ridley's dropped one spot to wide receiver 18 right now, and Amari Cooper taking over the wide receiver 17 spot. I wonder if that too has to do with maybe the D-Hop trade, but we'll look to see where he is on this list. But here's the thing about the value for Calvin Ridley. You're talking about a guy who the last time we had him out there, he was wide receiver 4 finish. And then he was going into a season without Julio Jones, which he didn't even play the full season. He left due to mental health reasons. And then boom, lost another whole season with gambling. So that being said, he was coming off a wide receiver 4 finish. So he was a top 5 option, and you're going to be getting him in the 4th round, which is crazy good value if he can repeat that. But if he still finishes out as a top 12 wide receiver in the NFL, you're still getting good value with them at wide receiver 17 or 18. And that year that he finished wide receiver 4, he did have Julio Jones only for 9 games, but still had Julio Jones for the majority of those games. If he could post the similar numbers as he did as a number 1 in Jacksonville with the help of Christian Kirk and the other weapons around him, which will assist in doing that, I think it could. But again,
did he have
Christian
10
Kirk
touchdowns that season?
He had 9 touchdowns.
Yeah.
So he had 9. He only had 90 receptions, but he had almost 1,400 yards.
So he's going to have to score, and that's my concern with any of these wide receivers. It's hard for me to make an argument that they're going to be top 15 guys. Even I can't really see a scenario where one of them is going to be hyper targeted. And so I think you might see 3 guys all have around the 80 to 90 target mark. And
Yeah.
if you have that, then touchdowns, either a guy's going to have to be super efficient, or you're going to have a bunch of guys that have 6 touchdowns. And I just don't think that's good enough to be in the top 10 for a passing league where there's so many dynamic weapons out there.
Here's the thing. Zay Jones had 5 touchdowns last year.
Yeah.
I think Zay Jones is the one who takes the back seat, obviously, here, especially because Christian
But
Kirk.
what changed?
What
changed?
Well,
because what
because
changed from last year was Zay Jones, is because Zay Jones is still playing the same Zay Jones position. Calvin Ridley just replaces.
but they're not running. They're not. Yeah, no, he doesn't. Calvin Ridley replaces Zay Jones, who was the outside man, because Christian Kirk last year, he was number 3 in terms of receivers of the most snaps run from the slot with 494. So the outside man was Zay Jones, and now it's going to be Calvin Ridley.
Zay Jones.
They didn't run that. If you want to look up to see how many sets they ran with 3 wide, then yeah, you can argue that for sure. So Zay Jones is going to be involved there. But when you run a 2 wide receiver set, because don't forget, Evan Ingram lines up out wide. He lines up in the slot. So I think at the end of the day, you have to see the target share for Zay Jones going down. At that point. So Christian Kirk also had a 23.2% target share on the team. I think that number goes down closer towards 20. And I think you're going to see Calvin Ridley be around 20. And I think you're going to see Evan Ingram's 17% target share go up a little bit more, around 19. So to me, I like Calvin Ridley. I'm targeting Christian Kirk because the value in round 6 is insane to me. So I'd rather, if you don't get Calvin Ridley, because the hard part about Ridley, and I'm just going to put this out there before we move on to Evan Ingram, and we talk about the Jaguars, is he's going right now 43rd overall. Right above him is Joe Mixon, Amari Cooper, Aaron Jones, Justin Herbert. So you've got a QB6, you've got a running back 17, kind of at the end of a tier there, and then you've got right below him Keenan Allen, Dameon Pierce, and TJ Hawkinson, who's tight end 3. So you're going to really have to see what the makeup of your team is when Calvin Ridley swings over to you. Because if Hawkinson's sitting there for you, or say somebody fades on Mark Andrews and you got that tight end there, the value is going to be at that position versus going somewhere else. But also, again, at the end of the day, if you went heavy running back and you need a wide receiver, this guy can give you wide receiver 1 possible numbers here. And that's the guy you can take a shot on. Or you go with the safer floor with Keenan Allen because you know what you're getting out of him on a high volume offense, passing wise. So I like Ridley. I think Christian Kirk is where the biggest value is. And I said that last year and it proved to be the right value. I just missed him in our draft, getting him in the 6th round. The guy who finished wide receiver 11. I don't think he finishes in the top 12 again, but I think he finishes in the top 18.
Yeah. I mean, I think that they, again, you look at the numbers last year where you had 83 receptions, 82 receptions, 73 receptions. Those are the top receiving leaders out of the Jacksonville Jaguars. I think Trevor Lawrence does spread the ball out. He's not hyper fixated on one guy. I think that Christian Kirk, they're going to be matchups. And so you saw this last year where, Evan Ingram had complete blow up games where he was the matchup nightmare for a team, and they took advantage of it. And you're going to see Calvin Ridley do the same, and you're going to see Christian Kirk do the same. I think that you might have some guys that you might have all 3 of these guys end up posting. Evan Ingram might post a top 7 tight end finish. You might have both Christian Kirk and Calvin Ridley post top 20 wide receiver numbers, but I just don't see any of them breaking through into that top 10 range or the top 5 tight end range just based on volume. Like, I just don't see it.
Yeah.
Just there's too many guys there that are part of the receiving game.
Yeah. And last note on the receivers before we get to Ingram and then move on to our next team is, in terms of it, you had 700 snaps for Marvin Jones last year. So when you look at the total number of snaps that he had there, that's a huge number that's going to be vacated. Obviously, Ridley's coming in. You still had 930 snaps by Zay Jones. And so he obviously was the first outside man out there. To me, like I said, I think that number goes down for Zay Jones. Christian Kirk had 991 snaps. I think that number is going to stay the same just because of how many snaps he takes out of the slot. Now, Evan Ingram is an interesting guy too. He was tight end 6 last year with 766 yards and 4 touchdowns. That touchdown number is a little low. He had a 17% target share. But here's the crazy part for me. The touchdown number seems low for a position, but he was still tight end 6 because tight ends outside of like we said before, you get past those first couple, the touchdown numbers go down. Yeah. But here's a number that goes in his favor that I think can stay the same way. He had 6 top 9 finishes last year and 2 more added on during the divisional and wild card round. He only had 9 red zone targets. That's the scary part for me for someone like him. So that's why those touchdown numbers were low. But he was number 2 for tight ends in yards after the catch. The way they used him last year when he started going off, they used him in screen passes, swing passes out the side, wheel routes, all over the place. They were creating mismatch, drag routes. So when you looked at him, to me, he had the most snaps out of the slot too as a tight end. He was number 1 out of the slot, which creates a complete mismatch. You're already a mismatch with his athleticism. Now you're out of the slot too as well. So you're not taking a linebacker off the line. You're taking a linebacker in open space. So I like him again. If you're taking a flip of a coin of a guy that's going to create opportunities for Trevor Lawrence. And I, again, don't look for him to finish with Travis Kelce, Mark Andrews, even maybe Hawkinson or Kittle numbers. But to be tight end 6, he put up solid numbers where you could have started him from week to week, and you had the upside of being a top 7 tight end finish, and you had the downside of him fading away in a game, in a situation. So it's just like how every other tight end in that area is. But I do like him, and they just made a good extension for him. I think he'll find his, and he's just a talented tight end. So
bet you has better numbers than Darren Waller.
I bet you he doesn't. But that being said, moving on. Let's go to the Houston Texans.